The Poughkeepsie Tapes was unnerving. The Poughkeepsie Tapes is a mockumentary slash pseudo found footage horror movie written, directed, edited, and co-developed by John Eric Dodal. I do use the term found footage loosely because yes, this movie is definitely a mockumentary, but the movie is about, tapes, footage that is found, and it's a pretty integral part of the whole narrative that the movie pushes forward. The movie released in 2007, but I only recently got a chance to watch it. And my god, what a watch it was. Throughout the whole thing, I just kind of felt uncomfortable, this feeling of unease, and honestly, it was a sorta semi-tough watch. Obviously, I got through it. I'm no stranger to horror or the disturbing, but this one kind of struck a nerve every now and then. The movie is presented as a documentary that follows the Water Street Killer. A killer that, kills, I guess. God, I'm so smart with words. The Water Street Killer who targets vulnerable women around the Poughkeepsie area. To be clear, the mockumentary follows the investigation behind the Water Street Killer, as he left a bunch of tapes just lying around for the police to find. Let me tell you right now, this serial killer is one sadistic fuck. And the movie really does follow that. It shows you how twisted his mind is, and what brutality he gives, or rather the kind of brutality he shows to these poor, helpless women. Half the time while I was watching the movie, I kind of just wanted to help them. I felt so bad for these women. Their actresses, by the way, were amazing. But on that note, one of the main women we follow is, I believe her name was Cheryl Dempsey, played by Stacy Dobowski, I want to say? Stacy Jobowski, and she plays Cheryl hauntingly. For all intents and purposes, I guess you can say that Cheryl Dempsey is the main character. Or I suppose in this case, the main victim we kind of follow throughout the entire movie. We follow the terrifying tale of Cheryl's abduction from the beginning of her kidnapping to the very end result, which I gotta say is very tragic. I'm not gonna say many spoilers here. In fact, that itself wasn't even a spoiler, as it's kind of hinted at the beginning of the movie, or I guess the beginning of the documentary, with heavy quotes. It's a mockumentary after all. Because the movie is presented as a documentary, it kind of jumps between the actual investigation with, I guess, the tapes of Cheryl Dempsey spliced in there. But of course, she isn't the only victim. She just happens to be the killer's favorite. In fact, pretty early on in the movie, you're told that about 1,000 or so of his 2,000 or something collection of tapes are all about Cheryl. Throughout the movie, you are shown the Water Street Killer's, his own very own documentary, technically, right? With the creation of these tapes. He would record and, basically show you straight up what he would do to his victims. And Cheryl was effectively his favorite plaything. He, in some twisted way, ended up loving her. And it's just the most disturbing thing to see. I know a lot of people didn't really like this movie. I saw some of the reviews giving it 5 out of 10s and things like that, but I don't know, something about this mockumentary really grabbed my attention and kept my attention throughout the whole thing. I think what really grabbed my attention was just the presentation of the movie itself. For the most part, when it heavily revolved on the documentary aspects of the movie, the mockumentary was at its best when it was kind of subtle. Although, to be clear, when the movie is actually showing you what's on these tapes, it is not subtle at all. Sorta. Not all the time, anyway. It's pretty overt with some of its violence, and I gotta admit, some of it is welcomed in this kind of fiction, but a lot of it is kinda eh. I know it sounds like I'm kinda going around in circles, but I think 80% of the movie was actually shockingly pretty good. Pretty great, actually. And that's when it was trying to be subtle. And the other 20%, when it was being too overt, it kind of took me out of the experience a little. And what I mean by that is specifically when the serial killer was actually on screen. When he was off screen, he was amazing. Like, it was actually fucking creepy. Whenever he would speak, he has like this weird undertone of like not knowing how to speak with people. So it's like, whenever he would speak to someone, one of his victims, which he would record, by the way, he recorded everything again, if I hadn't already made that clear. When he was behind the camera, just talking to his victims, it was some of those most haunting shit you could ever see, because you know what's gonna come. Like, it's that expectation that something's gonna happen. And the funniest thing is that you don't really see a lot of it, like what's going on when he's behind the camera. And that is when the movie, I think, is at its best. Because you don't really see this guy. He's just so threatening because you don't see him, you know? It's kind of the same thing in any like monster movie or any horror movie, that when they don't show the killer or the monster, I should say, it's a lot scarier. And then that monster shows up on screen, and then you're suddenly less scared of the movie because you know what to expect, I guess. It's the same reason I kind of like am iffy about M. Night Shyamalan's Signs. Once that alien shows up, it's not as scary, right? I don't know if any agree with me, but I'm pretty sure that's a common opinion, and it's one that I actually have. It's the same thing for this movie. I'm more horrified of the Water Street Killer when he's not on screen. And then he actually shows up on screen. And again, not a spoiler, but throughout the whole time, whenever he's on screen, he's kind of wearing this theatrical outfit, down to like an old Victorian mask, a plague doctor mask to be exact. And yeah, he's weird and creepy, but it really comes off as goofy when he's trying to threaten Cheryl in this ridiculous outfit, if I'm being completely honest. I feel like in a book, like, this just works better because my brain would just be imagining it. But in the movie, it just comes off as like cheap and sorta takes me out of the experience. Like, he's kind of cringe, if I had to describe him. But then again, I guess serial killers are fucking cringe, so in that sense, it does a good job to creep you out. But whenever Cheryl is on screen interacting with this killer, god damn does that actress sell it. Oh my god, I was horrified. Like, when certain scenes began and I saw this killer wearing this stupid outfit, frankly, and I was just like, what am I even watching? This was really good up until this point. And then Cheryl starts freaking the fuck out, and I bought it, and I was hooked right back in. Oh my god. Honestly, that was some of the best parts of the movie, whenever Cheryl was reacting to the killer, or any of the victims were reacting to the killer. Not so much the killer himself, because again, like all serial killers, he's kind of fucking cringe. Moving on to the documentary aspects of the movie, they were actually really good. Do you guys know that documentary, Don't Fuck With Cats? In terms of a documentary, that documentary was fucking incredible, really cinematic, and I could say the same thing for this mockumentary. Of course, I guess the mockumentary has the advantage of being an actual fictional movie, so the directors can kind of do whatever the fuck they want. And my god, John Eric Dodell, who, again, also edited this movie, did a really good job at editing. As an amateur, I guess, editor, I guess, there were so many cuts in this movie that I was like, oh, that's creepy, that's haunting, I love that, I want to do that kind of feeling throughout the whole thing, while at the same time also feeling constantly unnerved because of the story that was being told. And that was a great story. There's this one cut specifically where, here I will give a minor spoiler, the killer makes Cheryl say something along the lines of, you are my master, please let me pleasure you, or something along those lines. And then that same line is constantly repeated throughout the whole movie, like as echoes of her like dying spirit or something to that extent. But there's this one cut where it cuts from Cheryl to... Oh, Cheryl being tied up, by the way. It cuts from Cheryl being tied up to this scene of... I don't even know how to describe it. Some kind of, like, really beautiful landscape. And Cheryl's voice, that same line, just keeps repeating in echoes. And it's haunting. Giving kind of the imagery that everyone else's life is constantly going, but Cheryl is just stuck in this basement somewhere, being tortured for who knows how long. On that same note, there's this one particular shot of Cheryl where the camera just sort of freeze frames on this specific shot, and this single frame will continue to torture my thoughts for probably the next month or so. Because that frozen frame of Cheryl just staring directly at the camera was just unnerving, creepy. I don't know. I guess those two are synonyms, I guess. But I'm at a loss for words to just truly describe how that frame made me feel. Helpless, angry, in a sense that I'm not able to help. Yes, I know it's fiction, but fiction is supposed to incite some kind of feeling in you. And the feeling I got when seeing that frame of Cheryl was helplessness. And I felt so sorry for her. And I think the movie did a great job at making the viewer just feel sorrowful that this poor girl, this woman, has to go through all this fucking shit. And my god, if I ever found this killer, I'd probably just fucking shoot him dead right where he stood. To close out everything, in my personal opinion, I think this movie was great. And if you're a fan of, like, found footage or mockumentaries, you should watch it. It's actually really good, really entertaining the whole way through. And if you're not scared by it, at the very least, you're going to be entertained. Because it is a pretty, like, enthralling narrative, I have to say. This movie was unnerving, and more importantly, it was just uncomfortable to sit through. It was terrifying, you know? Yes, this movie is fiction. Yes, it's a mockumentary. It's not real. But the notion that someone out there in the real world, in our reality, is very much likely suffering through these same things that Cheryl went through is chilling. And that kind of thought, after watching the movie, especially after the end credits roll with no music, it just kind of got to me.